Welcome visitor, my name is Declan and I'm pleased to offer you 8th part of the WoW Player's Diary. Leveling through Northrend was slow but exciting, a definite improvement over Outland. Blizzard packed Northrend with questing content which had both upsides and downsides. On the upside, this offered plenty of variety for players leveling multiple alts, especially since Heirloom Gear made the process much faster. The downside, however, was that for casual players like me, it was easy to miss large parts of the story. I hit a level 80 cap after questing barely into snowdrifts of Storm Peaks, finishing only a handful of quests there and running a couple of dungeons. This meant many significant questlines remained unfinished on my main character. For instance, I missed most of Brent Brosebeard adventures in Storm Peaks, which culminated in him finding his brother Muradin, long thought lost during Arthur's original Northern campaign. The entire Ice Crown zone remained untouched for me until the following summer. Overall, leveling from 70 to 80 took me about 2.5 months. Naturally, I was eager to start raiding, but that depended heavily on my guild situation. Unfortunately, things weren't going well with my guild at the time, the Vindicators. We weren't really a raiding guild. Even our Karajan runs back in the Burning Crusade times hadn't been consistent, often requiring members to team up with players from other guilds. This became a problem then. Back in September 208, some members attempted the TBC raid Zulaman. I don't know the full details, but it seems the attempt suffered from issues common in casual groups. Some players were unprepared, the raid didn't go well, then arguments erupted on a guild forum afterward. The end result was that several players left the guild, weakening us further. By end of January 209, the guild activity hadn't recovered. Attempts for organized heroic dungeon runs, let alone raids, seemed dim. After some thought, I decided it was time to find a new home. The search didn't take long. Within a week, I joined Travelers of Azeroth. Unlike the Vindicators, who had a dedicated role-playing element, even in maintaining it in secondary chat channels, Travelers of Azeroth was a typical social guild. They weren't focused on cutting-edge progression, but they were friendly and active. They ran heroic dungeons regularly and occasionally organized fun runs into older raid content. It was with them that I finally got to experience classic raids like Ruins of Ankh-Rush and Molten Core for the first time. While I had started preparing my character for a raiding right after hitting level 80, more on that later, finding this new active guild in February 209 felt like a fresh start. Coincidentally, February was also when I began writing my wowcasual.info, my WoW blog. The late 200s were an interesting time. YouTube was gaining traction, but social media were still relatively new. For many, online life still revolved around web portals, forums, platforms like LiveJournal and individual standalone blogs. The idea to start my own World of Warcraft blog grew from two main factors. First, I already had an experience having run a standalone blog on WordPress and, before that, a page on a popular live internet platform. Second, the escalating global financial crisis was hitting my main job hard, forcing me to look for side income. I decided to try my luck earning money online. I'll admit upfront, my success with monetization was fairly modest. When I mentioned starting a WoW blog to my online friends, they were skeptical. Why a blog about WoW, they asked. Who needs another one? Everyone sticks with Goha forum. Goha referred to goha.ru, a long-standing and still active MMO portal with a very busy WoW forum section. They had a point, but looking closer, the dedicated WoW blog scene wasn't actually that crowded back then. I knew only two others, one run by a player named Sepik and another MMOhelper.ru run by Nekdeka, who later became well known as Kuvaldich. That MMO Helper site eventually grew into popular WoW resource itself. Well, later it was sold, but anyway, it was really popular. So, while Goha was popular, the space for dedicated WoW blogs felt relatively open. Plus, Goha suffered from the issues common to older online communities. It was dominated by veterans from various MMOs who weren't always welcoming to newcomers. In fact, some of them were really toxic. I saw a need for a place where new players wouldn't get called noobs or mocked for asking basic questions. There was also a clear demand for beginner-friendly guides. WoW had recently been localized into new languages, bringing in a wave of new blood, who were likely overwhelmed by sites like Goha and formed a sort of silent minority there. I saw plenty of examples of kinds of guides people needed. I was already a regular visitor to sites like wowhead.com, which was starting to pull ahead of competitors like Totbot and the GoTo database. And WoW Insider, which along with the MMO Champion was a major source for news, analysis and guides. Therefore, ignoring my friend's skepticism, I registered the domain wowcasual.info and asked a tech-savvy friend to help me set up WordPress on it. My first blog post went live on February 20th, 2009. The second followed on February 23rd. It was my very first guide explaining how to choose the right server. I'll likely revisit this story of vlog and wider MMO blog share later, but for now I'll just say this: I never regretted starting it. In March 209, my main character Dequin turned out 1 year old. While I wasn't planning on leaving my home server Moonglade, curiosity led me to check out the Russian WoW servers, WoW. To do this, I created a new dwarf hunter named Gatekeeper on the Eversong reel. Eversong was considered the unofficial WoW role-playing server at the time and for a long while after. I hoped to find a similar atmosphere to Moonglade there, and plus I was interested to see the official Russian localization in action. Seeing familiar places with Russian names like Stalgorn for Iron Forge, well, was interesting. The translations themselves didn't bother me, mostly they just amused me. What really stood out, though, were the character nicknames I encountered. Names like Blondinko, Blondie, Ужас, Horror, Жопоед, Ass-Eater, or Kusai Ruby, Bite and Slash, gave me, well, a bit of cultural shock. I hadn't seen English equivalents quite like this on Moonglade. Apparently, this was a known phenomenon. Someone had even done a study of the prevalence of vulgar nicknames on WoW launch servers, analyzing which crude terms were most common. Another surprise was the approach to guilds. While questing near Karanas, someone randomly invited me to their guild with a simple message. It contrasted sharply with my experience joining Vindicators on Moonglade, which involved a WoW role-playing introduction. Here it was just, "Hey, wanna join?" Later, while at Fire and Forge Auction House, another player walked up and asked why I wasn't in a guild, immediately offering suggestions. During my entire time on new server, I had only received a spontaneous guild invite once, and that was after a successful dungeon run. Overall, my impression of primary WoW role-playing server were mixed. I felt like the role-playing aspect of WoW, regardless of the region, was already diminished. This echoed an article I'd read on WoW Insider back in summer 208, which discussed how numbers were increasingly dominating the game. Optimal item stats, DPS, HPS meters, perfect ability rotations, various rating system, and so on. Character progression was shifting heavily towards statistical optimization, making the RPG label feel less relevant. While this focus on stats was undeniable, the game's lore still held and holds a strong appeal for a large part of the community, but more on that later. Perhaps the biggest personal goal for Match was buying an epic flying mount. Back then this cost a hefty 5,000 gold, a serious sum at the time. Despite playing for a year and being reasonably frugal, I only had just over 2,000 gold savings. My professions were still mining and skinning. My first thought was farming ore. Current Northrend ore, like Seronite, was heavily contested, and so I focused on farming thorium in the old world instead. This worked reasonably well. Thorium ore sold for about 4 or 5 gold per piece. Demand was steady, and I could gather, 50-60 pieces an hour. Another strategy was farming gold and items from old dungeons. At the level 80, even in basic gear, I could easily clear classic instances like Starholm Soul. A single round yielded around 50-60 gold directly from mobs, plus a good amount of rune cloth. Rune cloth was still in demand, around 8-10 stacks per run, selling for 5-4 gold per stack. As player used it for reputation greens, adding roughly another 50 gold per run. I even tried soloing parts of vanilla raids. Molten core was too tough, but I could clear some trash packs in Zoo group up to the first boss. As soon as I scrapped together the 5,000 gold, I rushed to Shadow Moon Valley and purchased my epic griffon. It was the first and only time in my WoW career I spent nearly every piece of gold I owned, but the upgrade was absolutely worth it. The speed boost made farming ore drastically faster and simply getting around Northrend much more convenient. With the mount secured, my next priority was gearing up for my toon for raids. The primary sources for better armor and weapons at the time were, running heroic 5-player dungeons, heroics, earning reputation rewards, crafting items, and buying gear with emblems of heroism, badges dropped from heroic dungeon bosses. Having a good guild also offered the possibility of joining runs of T7 raids in their 10 players version. The For the Lich King offered these starting raids in 2 formats: 10 players dropping item level 200 loot and 25 players dropping item level 213 loot, each with separate weekly lockouts. Furthermore, bosses also dropped emblems of valor, which could eventually be used to purchase raid quality item tokens in Dalaran, an expensive but valuable option. The gearing process took about 3 weeks and involved significant gold investment as well. For example, buying a crafted weapon like Nezingwari 4000 cost several hundred gold. By early April, however, I felt ready to tackle the first tier of the Wrath of the Lich King raids.